Welcome back to Who's to Know. So today for our Souptober, we are going to do a potato and leek soup, which is called Vichyssoise because it is basically a potato and leek soup with cream or half and half added. So it's a blended soup, so it's very creamy, but it's got some really good flavors. It's a very basic soup. It has roots back to French cooking. So let's get started. So the recipe I'm using is from The Joy of Cooking. And it says to start with 3 tablespoons of butter. And Julia always said, if you're afraid of butter, use cream. So this is a recipe that always makes me think of Julia Child whenever I hear of it or see it, because it is quintessential Julia. It's got butter and cream. So I've got a large pot and I'm gonna put I've got my 3 tablespoons of butter cut up into tablespoon chunks, and that will go on the stove, and I will start to melt that once I've got my potatoes and leeks ready to go. So I'm just using regular baking potatoes, and we're just gonna peel these, and then we will work on getting the leeks ready, which I will show you. For that, we are gonna use a bowl and a colander. And that is gonna, it's the simplest way I have found to do leeks, but I would recommend doing potatoes first because leeks are very sandy, and we are going to go ahead and cut them up first before putting them in our colander. And that way, we're not gonna get sand all over our potatoes. So I'm gonna go ahead and peel and cut these potatoes. I'm gonna cut them in half lengthwise, and then just cut them very thin. That way they cook really fast. The nice thing about this soup is not a terribly labor intensive or a large time commitment. So probably the biggest learning curve would be learning what to do with the leeks. So I'm gonna get this going, and then we'll come back and work on the leeks. All right, so we've got our potatoes cut up in our bowl, and now we're gonna work on our leeks. Leeks are basically, they look like ginormous green onions. They grow in very sandy soil, and because they grow and they have layers, they have sand and dirt in between their layers. And so the way you break them down is you can take off any random outside pieces, but then we are gonna cut the root end off. And then I like to just cut a little bit of the top piece off. So we're gonna do that with all of them. And then we will get into breaking them down. So this recipe calls for 1 1/4 pounds of potatoes, and then 6 medium-sized leeks. These leeks are a little bit larger than medium-sized, but not by much, honestly. And so I am going to just err on the side of this might make a little bit more than the recipe calls for, and I'll just adjust the liquid that I add to it based on what the thickness is of the soup. So we've got all of our leeks. Now there's some pieces these are a lot tougher and more woody, and so you could save these and saute them in butter and have them be a little bit softer and do something different with them, but for this soup, they would be a little too tough. So we want more light colored, tender bits. So what you do is you cut it in half lengthwise, and you see all of the layers, and you also see the dirt. So what I like to do is we want to slice these very thinly because we want them to cook really fast. Again, this is one of those soups where we are not investing a lot of time into it, which is really nice. It's a quick, very simple soup. It's kind of like a potato soup with the leeks added to it, which gives it much more depth of flavor. And so what I do is we're gonna cut all of this, and we're gonna put it in our colander. And then once we have the colander full, we're going to fill it with water, and we're just gonna shake it around to shake the sand off and rinse it quite a couple of times to make sure that we get that nice and clean, and we're not bringing sand to the soup, because that is not That is no bueno for Souptober. So we're gonna go ahead and cut all of these, and then I will come back and show you the rinsing process. All right, so we have our pot with the butter, and we are gonna go ahead and put that on the stove. I'm gonna put it just on medium heat for the time being. We can bump it up if we need to. But since we're gonna be rinsing these leeks, we do not need to do that. So like I said, I've got the colander on top of a large bowl. Now, if you had a sink that filled up quickly, you could very easily just do this in a sink, but I don't like having to fish out all the little bits. That's why I do it in a colander. And you could fill up a sink if you had really fast water. You could fill up the whole sink and shake it like this in the sink, but I just have found this is the easiest way for me to do it. So we're gonna fill this up. We're gonna really agitate the leeks, and we're gonna shake the colander around like this and shake the leeks and just get them nice and clean. We'll dump that water out and we'll do it at least one more time. If it seems like the water is much cleaner, that's the other nice part, is that you can look into the water and see how much dirt and sand you've gotten off. And if it seems like we've gotten most of it, then we shouldn't need to rinse it another time. So even as it's filling up, I'm gonna go ahead and be tossing these around a little bit, just starting to get them rinsed off. And then we'll do that twice, and then we will be ready to pop them into our pot. All right, so we have our butter browning and melting. And so we are gonna add our leeks in here. And since they're wet, they're gonna sizzle quite a bit. And we're just gonna saute the leeks for a little bit. And then we will add the potatoes. That is actually looking like plenty of leeks. So I am gonna save these. These are gonna make a really good omelet or something. The rest of what I have here is gonna make a really, really nice omelet. So I'm gonna leave that for now. And I'm actually gonna add an extra tablespoon of butter because this turned out to be a lot more leeks as I cut it. And so the nice thing about them is that it's not gonna hurt them. They can just hang out in a bag in the fridge. So I will just wrap them in a paper towel and put them in a gallon-sized baggie in the fridge. And then I'll save them for something like scrambled eggs or an omelet or something like that. So they will make something super delicious. So I'm also gonna just put the lid on now that I have this extra tablespoon of butter. I'm gonna put the lid on and let that butter melt so that it can add to it, and then I will be stirring it with a wooden spoon. And then once those have softened just a bit, then we will add the potatoes and then the broth. So we'll come back for that. Okay, it has been about 10 minutes and the leeks are starting to look really nice and soft. They're actually getting what we would call like almost a melted look to them, where they're very soft, they're translucent, and they almost look like they're melting into the butter. So that is a good spot where we can then add our potatoes in. So we've got our potatoes, we're gonna put those in first. And then this is where you can use a variety of different things. I have some vegetable stock or vegetable broth that I made, and I'm just gonna utilize that. I was gonna put it in the freezer, but then figured I would use it before I froze it, and that would make it a lot easier to make sure it gets used. So you can use chicken broth, chicken stock, vegetable broth. I mean, you could technically use water if you really needed to. If you didn't have anything extra on hand, you could definitely just use water. If you had some white wine, you could add a little bit of that in with some water just to give it some extra flavor. So we are gonna bring this up to a simmer. I'm gonna put the lid on it, bring it up to a simmer, and then we're just gonna cook this until the potatoes are soft, and then we will use an immersion blender. which I will show you what that is, and we will use that to blend it up, and then we'll add some cream. I'm actually using non-dairy cream for mine, but you could use cream or half and half, or this is the point at which, once we have blended it, that would be the point at which you could just serve it that way without the cream, and that would just be a traditional potato leek soup. So we'll come back in just a little bit once this has cooked all the way. Okay, so this has cooked, and it took about 20 minutes to simmer with the potatoes in it. And so this is our immersion blender, and basically it's also called a stick blender, and we put that down into the soup and it just blends it as you go. So I'll show you how that works, and then we will add some cream to it. I've already seasoned it with some salt and pepper, but we'll taste it once it's done. So when you have a stick blender, you stick it down in before you turn it on, because you do not want soup to fling everywhere. It works by sucking up bits into the blender blades. You could do this with a regular blender if you had it, but it is a lot harder to be transferring it to a blender, and it's hot, and so this is definitely worth the investment if you're going to be making a lot of soups. They don't tend to be terribly expensive, and they don't take up a lot of room, so I do recommend getting one if you're going to be making this kind of soup at all. So we're just going to finish doing this, and then come back to add the cream and finish the seasoning. All right, so we've got some, I'm using dairy-free heavy whipping cream, but you could definitely just use regular heavy whipping cream. This is much thicker than regular, so I may have to add some more broth once I have mixed it up. But this is what makes it the Vichyssoise. And so it just makes it creamy. You can serve it cold or hot, but I prefer it hot. I'm just gonna blend this, and then I will taste the seasoning and see how it is. See if we need to adjust the salt or pepper. And then this is gonna be served with chopped chives on top to bring out more of that oniony flavor from the leeks. This is really good with the chives. It's also really good with buttered croutons on top, if you have those. So it would be really good with a loaf of bread. We're gonna serve this with a rotisserie chicken to get some protein. But otherwise, this is a Vichyssoise. Traditionally in France, it is a cold soup, but like I said, you can serve it cold or hot, and I prefer it hot. So I hope you enjoy. Let us know if there's anything that any questions or comments you'd like to leave, and happy cooking.